I'm Trish Thompson, and today we have some amazing things to talk about. We are not only sharing but celebrating Bill Purdy's 3-year finish to the protocol for bee venom therapy. He was diagnosed with Lyme disease. We're going to go over that, how he got his diagnosis, kind of what he went through and so forth. Today is all about what happened when he started bee venom therapy and the end of his journey and where he is now. So Bill, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to you. And really what we'd like to know starting off is, how did this journey start? You know, how did you figure out you had Lyme disease?
Sure. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. My wife and I vacationed on Nantucket Island. And as many know, it's endemic. Lyme disease is endemic up there. And I grew up south of Boston and in New Jersey when I was a teenager. So I had always been aware of Lyme disease. But I was vacationing on Nantucket, came home from vacation, back down to Charlotte, and I woke up in the middle of the night. I was sweating, and I didn't really know what was wrong. It felt like a bad panic attack. But again, having been aware of Lyme disease, I started putting two and two together, and I was in the shower the following day or a day after, and I noticed a red spot in my thigh, and I'm like, I must have got bit by something. Maybe I got bit by a tick. So I started to have these episodes of kind of panic-like attacks and night sweats, and I went to my GP in pretty short order. I got back from Nantucket, and this happened pretty quickly within a week or two. And I asked him to test me for Lyme disease, and it's interesting, when you talk to people with Lyme disease, you'll hear how there's disbelief, or we don't have Lyme disease here. But I was pretty adamant. I said, look, and this guy's a good guy. I said, look, I just came from Nantucket. I'm having these weird symptoms and I got bit by something. Test me.
Very quickly had symptoms, like almost immediately after being bitten.
About a week to 2 weeks. I have a diligent journal. It was probably about 8 or 9 days from when I got back from Nantucket that I started having strange things occurring. So it all happened pretty rapidly. And I was pretty aggressive in advocating for myself early on. Anyway, I told him to test me, and he called me on my cell phone 24 hours later and said, "Geez, Billy, you got Lyme disease." And I kind of felt like, yeah, I told you so. So I went back, he wrote me a prescription for doxycycline. And about 8 days into that, I started having these horrific cascade of symptoms, which I later found out to be a Herx reaction. But there was a potential misstep there. They took me off that. They thought maybe I was having an allergic reaction. They put me on amoxicillin. But that was the start of my journey. And that would have been the summer of 2013. That's when I started to have worse symptoms. Symptoms, were cascading, and I was having horrible cognitive impairment, neuropathy, difficulty breathing. It was quite horrific. So after the amoxicillin, I asked him if, maybe I'm, having a reaction to that. I said, or maybe I have something else. During all this time, I'm reading up on Lyme disease. I'm like, maybe I got infected with something else. He's like, yeah, good point. He goes, I've read about that in the literature. You can get a co-infection. So he's testing me for things like Ehrlichia and other things, but he didn't have all the proper testing. He didn't know enough about it. He didn't get any, we didn't get any readings back on anything else other than the Lyme disease. And that's when I started seeking other professionals, Lyme literate physicians and other experts in the area. That was about 3 months in. He was continuing to try to treat me with antibiotics, mainly amoxicillin. And that's the time I sought out the expertise of a Lyme specialist. And he started to do more testing, and they found out that in addition to Lyme disease, I had Babesia, Mycoplasma, Anaplasmosis. I had a cocktail of other infections, which most Lyme patients do, when the tick bites you, whatever else is in the tick. Started me on some aggressive treatment as well, more broader antibiotics, antimalarials, antifungals. I was on literally hundreds of medications for quite a long time. I also decided to go down the path of IV. So I had a PICC line inserted into my heart, and I was infusing with Rocephin every day for 6 months. So that first 6 to 8 months was fairly horrifying. My life was kind of robbed, and but I was very aggressive. I was treating very, very heavily, very early on. You know, you read about Lyme disease, you know, it's hard to get and easy to treat. Well, anyone who has Lyme disease knows
Funny.
it's just the opposite. It's
Right.
easy to get and it's very hard to treat. And I found that out in the first 6 months.
So you had the first 3 months you were with a doctor that wasn't Lyme literate but was trying, and then you had 6 months with a Lyme literate, and you really attacked from every angle you could with the IVs or the PICC line and oral medications. How did you feel at this point? You're about 9 months in at this point.
So I stayed with the Lyme literate doctor for almost 4 years. You know, I was under his care for a long time. We tried everything. So, you know, when I look back in my journal, there was some ebb and flow that first year. There was times when I was on oral antibiotics where I'd feel a little bit better for, you know, a week or two. When I say better, just mildly better. I could get up and go to work. There was times when I was on the IV where I'd feel, wow, this is working. I think this is doing the trick. But I would invariably, whether I stayed on a treatment or stopped a treatment and started a new one, symptoms would always come back, regardless of what I tried. And, you know, at this point, you know, for the first year, 2 years even, I'm doing heavy antibiotics, heavy antimalarials, antifungals, flagyls, Malarone, different antibiotic cocktails and pulsing. I'm using herbals. So I was kind of exhausting everything that I could.
I imagine this was fairly expensive too, all of these different, and could you work? I mean,
Pardon me?
Could you sustain working during this time?
Barely. Luckily, I own the company that I work for, so I was able to work from bed, literally. You know, I had difficulty reading a book to my 6-year-old. I had difficulty driving a car. There was periods where I could barely get to the end of the driveway to go to the mailbox. It was significant impairment. Yeah, it's very costly. At one point, probably 2 years in, so at this point, you know, Lyme is affecting so many body systems. I mean, I could go head to toe. You know, I had problems with vision, with hearing, with taste, with swallowing. It felt like I had nerve damage in my throat. I had breathing issues. It felt like I had labored breathing. I had urological issues, GI issues. And I'd go to a GI doctor. I'd go to a urologist. I went to a neurologist. They scanned my brain. I went to a cardiologist. I was having heart palpitations. At one point, about 2 years in, again, I was very, very sick. I managed to get on a plane, fly up to Cape Cod and see a renowned Lyme specialist up there. And he worked with my doctor down here in North Carolina, as well as the Lyme literate doctor that I was seeing. I was kind of teaming these guys together. Like, look, it's not working. Let's get some smarter minds working together. So they were pretty open to it, working together. And we're all, you know, I was kind of raising my hand to be the guinea pig. I was on different treatments by different doctors, sometimes multiple treatments at the same time. So I was availing myself of everything I possibly could to eradicate, you know, what was going on. And again, I'd have these transient spells of, okay, I'm feeling better. You know, this could be working, but it never lasted long. Weeks or maybe a month at the outset, I'd be nominal and then I'd come crashing back down.
So you had 4 years of this, kind of a little bit of ebb and way and feeling okay and then really not feeling okay. At what point did you decide maybe this wasn't the best route?
That's a great question, because you get to a point where there's dogma. You have blind faith in medicine, and that these doctors are trying to help you, but you start to question those kinds of things. And I had been down the path of, in addition to doing all the other things the doctors were telling me, I was experimenting with some kind of crazy treatments, as most Lyme patients do, because they're not getting well. I did, you know, Rife. I had a Rife machine. I did On Demand. It's like a Rife. I was doing acupuncture. I was doing crazy herbs and tinctures. I was doing elimination diets, and nothing was working. And I had just started down the path of drinking pharmaceutical grade hydrogen peroxide. I was putting it with an eyedropper into distilled water and starting to consume it because I read that it worked for some people. I mean, I was at the end of my rope. I was trying, in hindsight, looking back, some insane methodologies to try to cure myself.
Well, that only reiterates the fact that there are so many things out there that we just don't know about Lyme disease and how to treat it.
Yeah.
So when you get to that point where you think about drinking hydrogen peroxide or things like that, I imagine that was a pretty intense state for you to be in.
Trish, it really was. The other thing that a lot of people know in the Lyme community, but others don't outside the Lyme community, is what it does to your psychology. Suicide is a huge problem with Lyme disease, and I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you it was a daily thought after the first year. And here I am, year 3.5, drinking hydrogen peroxide, and I'm daily trying to not talk myself out of it, but somewhere in my mind thinking, that might be how I end up. This is no way to live.
Well, that is definitely something that comes to mind when it's a never-ending cycle of feeling unbearably bad. It's not even describable, I think, or even imaginable for others that haven't lived through it. And so tell me how you got to where you are right now.
Okay, well, I have to mention two extraordinary people,
Yeah.
John and Barbara McLean. About 6 months into Lyme disease, I had been asking questions on some online forum, and John had reached out to me and said, "Hey, we've got a Lyme group in Charlotte. Why don't you come to one of our meetings?" And I couldn't get to a meeting until probably a year into the illness. I was so incapacitated that I couldn't get in a car and go to the meeting. And about a year in, I finally went to a first meeting. It was on a Saturday, and I met John and Barbara and probably half a dozen other people that day. And I started to, and I think he held those meetings every other week, every 2 weeks. And I would try, no matter how bad I was feeling, to go to those meetings because it was a forum to exchange information with other Lyme patients, right? Because mainstream medicine doesn't know how to treat it. So we would compare notes. Hey, what are you taking? And I would look at what everyone else was trying. I would tell them what I was trying. And so I tried my best to go to those meetings for the next 2 years. This is about a year in, up to the point where I'm drinking the hydrogen peroxide. I'd probably make half of those meetings. And I mentioned that because around this time that I was, going down the path of the hydrogen peroxide, as well as antibiotics, I was doing everything. John had connected with a woman by the name of Ellie Lobel, who at the time was driving around the country in her car, going to Lyme meetings and talking to people about BVT, bee venom therapy. So it was the timing of this was just that I was able to make that meeting, that she was there, that John and Barbara had arranged for her to come on that particular Saturday. I went there and I had read up on it. It was one of the things I had read months earlier. And I went to the meeting and she told this incredible story. And I remember sitting in that room, being kind of angry, almost not believing her. And I was asking her some very tough questions because I thought she had an angle or she was selling something, as Lyme patients often feel because they don't get well and they try all these treatments and nothing works. So I remember asking her some very, very difficult questions. Like, I was very dubious, and she was extraordinarily credible. When you meet face to face with someone and you can ask those kind of questions, you can tell, I can anyway, I'm a pretty good judge of character. This woman was authentic. And so anyway, she told her amazing tale. And I went from the meeting directly home and I said to my wife, I asked my wife, I said, can you commit to helping me out for the next 3 years by stinging me with bees?
And what did your wife say? I imagine, obviously, she has watched you over the course of 4 years do everything under the sun you could find. And at this point, what does she say when you say, I'm going to get some bees and can you sting me?
She said, absolutely. There wasn't a pause. There wasn't a hesitation. It was absolutely. It didn't sound crazy to her. She said, absolutely, let's do it. And that's what I needed to hear, quite frankly, because, I was still, all right, let me bounce this off my wife, but here I am drinking hydrogen peroxide, right? So stinging myself with a bee didn't seem that crazy to me, but she embraced it immediately without hesitation. And I think within 72 hours, I had gotten all the things ready. I'd started taking my vitamin C, and I won't get into the details of the protocol unless you have questions, but I ramped up and started doing it almost immediately.
I know we can all get the protocol from the Facebook page, and Ellie has a brand new book out as well for bee venom therapy with the protocol. So part of it is 10 stings is your goal, to get up to 10 stings. How long did it take you to ramp up to that 10 stings? And during that time, were you still taking some of the things you were taking previously to kind of in between, or?
Good question. So I was, at the time I started the initial stinging to when I get up to the 10 stings, the therapeutic dose, I was weaning myself off of all the other treatments. I was still on antibiotics, but started weaning down on those. And I even told my one Lyme doctor that I was going to do this. And he's like, yeah, I heard about that. Okay. I mean, he was still, he was open to it, which is saying a lot. You need to try to change people's minds. And, in this, with this disease, they throw the kitchen sink at it. So someone saying they're going to do BVT might not sound that crazy to a Lyme doctor. And so he was open to it. And he
right. You're right.
Me as I transitioned off his stuff into the bee venom.
So when you did your ramp up from your 1 sting up to 10, tell me about that time period and how you felt, and kind of, I know that it can cause some acute symptoms as you ramp up and so forth. So what was your thought process and how did it feel during that time?
It was, I had committed to it in my mind so adamantly before I began that I kind of, anything that happened, I said, I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. And so for that, it took me about 8-9 weeks or 7-8-9 weeks to get to the 10 sting threshold. But during that time, I would continue to have herks. For me, when I started stinging and doing the ramp up, in addition to being very itchy, which everyone is until your body transitions with the histamine reaction and you're not itchy anymore, I would get very tired, which I actually liked. I would sting and it would wear me out and I'd take a nap. I mean, when you're feeling like crap, you'd rather be napping. But it would be similar feelings as if I was on antibiotics. I would get herxes. But one thing I did notice in this ramp up period, the herxes were a little more tolerable. They seemed a little milder. The cascade of symptoms wasn't as harsh as when I was on antibiotics or some of the other therapies. So that was something that I noted during that ramp up period.
And did you find that the herx, you saying it really was a little bit less in terms of the severity. Did you find that herx lasted less of a time? You were recovering faster?
So as I look back now, over the entire course, the duration, the severity of the symptoms have slowly began to shrink in time and become less severe over time. Now there's probably a period in that first year where I would still get pretty severe herxes, and I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. It wasn't an easy thing to do. But over time, when I look at all the data, and I'm a big data guy, my days of feeling well, and I give every day a numeric value, and I take note on a herx or how I'm feeling or the length of the symptomology. And over time, the symptoms have gone down, have been less severe, and they've shortened in time.
Okay, so tell us, what was the very first symptom that you noticed that just wasn't there anymore? As you went and things started changing, what were some of the first symptoms where you're like, wow, I haven't had that in a while?
Yeah, so energy. So fatigue, anyone who has Lyme disease, you say, fatigue. And fatigue's really the only adjective that you can explain to other people what it's like. And people will quickly say, well, take a nap, buck up. It's not that kind of fatigue. It's fatigue that's overwhelming fatigue, where you can't function, you can't think, you have no energy to do anything. And so during this ramp up time, and I would say, so I started in May of 2016. it was around August. So it was about a month into the full therapeutic dose, 10 stings 3 times a week. I went out to mow my lawn. And I didn't have a very big yard. I had a front yard and a backyard, and I mowed the front and the back. And it used to for me to mow the lawn on a Saturday afternoon was I'd have to, sleep in, get up, mow the lawn, take a break, finish mowing the lawn, come in, rest. I mean, it was a big deal to just mow the lawn. I mean, for a period of when I had Lyme disease, my wife was mowing the lawn. But on one particular Saturday, I mowed the front yard and then I mowed the backyard. And I came in and my wife said, "Did you just mow the front and the backyard?" I'm like, "Yeah, I felt like I could." So it was like beyond anecdotal data, I had the energy to actually mow the front and backyard, which I hadn't been able to do in almost 4 years.
And that is a huge win. I mean, that it doesn't, to a lot of people saying that, would they be like, so? But that is a massive win for somebody with Lyme to be able to go out and do that.
Yeah, Trish, it really is. And it gives you an actual data point to say, gosh, this is working. It's not that I think it's working. I can do something that I couldn't do before. As little as it was, mowing the lawn, it was validation that, gosh, I couldn't do that before. And so, that just started to build my hope that, okay, I'm on the right path with this thing. Such a minuscule thing like that validated the whole thing.
So fatigue was your first one, which is a huge one because when you are that fatigued, everything is hard and every symptom is worse because you are so tired just from the inside out. So what was the next one that you noticed dissipated?
So again, not that they happen in this neat order, but mostly the fatigue went first and then brain fog, cognitive impairment, lifted. So I'd have energy, but I'd still be, confused. I was never as sharp. Used to be a really sharp guy. I was never really sharp during this time. And
at what point did this start? At what point did you feel like the fog was starting to lift?
I would say in the first, so the energy and the cognitive impairment in the first, I want to say 3 to 6 months, I started feeling those lift. The first year was pretty marked improvement. Second year, even more. Third year, even more. But it's hard to say, during, month 3 through 6, this happened. Month 6 through 9, this happened. Again, I encourage anyone thinking of doing something like this to take a very diligent approach to making notes and keeping a journal, because only when you look back do you see that, oh, wow, I'm able to do this, or this wasn't happening anymore. So again, the symptoms for me seemed to just fall away very, very slowly. It wasn't like I woke up one day and I feel great. It was so mild over such a long period of time. You hear the analogy a lot of times, it's a marathon. It's not a race. There's no quick fix here. Same with how you look at how your wellness improves. It's slow. It's a grind. But over time, for me, the cognitive impairment in that first year, that was a pretty big thing, along with the energy.
So in that first year, how did you feel about work? I mean, obviously, if your brain fog is lifting, the fatigue is lifting, I suppose you're not really working from your bed anymore, are you, at this point?
No, I'm going to work. I'm traveling more. My business partners, they're noticing an improvement in me. I mean, they knew that I was, stinging with live bees, and they're like, "Hey, man, that's working." So I'm getting it from my business partners as well, saying, "Gosh," and they've seen me through this 4-year stretch thus far. Being on all these antibiotics. I'd be in the office, injecting myself with Rocephin. I mean, they saw me and they saw that I wasn't getting better, and then they saw me improving with doing, and at this point I had weaned off every other treatment. I wasn't doing anything except the bees.
And so this was at what point, like a 6-month point, or?
Yeah, I'd say 6 months to a year into BVT, 4 years overall into Lyme.
Okay, great. And so now we're at the 1-year point. We've got some fatigue is being handled. We've got some amazing brain function. What else are you feeling at this point between at 1 and 2 for as far as symptoms and so forth?
So, neuropathy. So another big symptom for me was numbness from my elbows to my fingers, from my calves down to my toes. I had significant tingling and numbness. That started to fall away as well. And I think at this point I was starting to, in the year 2, I was starting to sting, my knees, my calves, my elbows, my shoulders. As you get comfortable with the treatment, you can start to sting other parts of your body. So yeah, those types of symptoms started going away. By this time, my breathing had improved. I didn't have that labored breathing. I glazed over it, but anyone who has babesia in addition to Lyme, it's as horrifying. It's a form of malaria. It's similar to malaria, and you have these horrid night sweats where you just wake up soaking wet. Those symptoms abated in the first year as well, because those night sweats went away. Again, it's hard to, communicating it to you and those listening. The symptoms were so many. I mean, I had hundreds of symptoms, but they all started slowly falling away. The big ones, the fatigue, the cognitive impairment, the breathing, the neuropathy, all started to dissipate and go away.
So it sounds to me like around year 2, you really were getting back mobility function. Your sleep pattern was better because you're not waking up with night sweats. The inflammation overall in your body is going down because you're not feeling that heavy breathing in the lungs. Your cognitive abilities, all of these things, your fatigue levels. So you're into year 2. We've got another year of the protocol. So tell me about 2 to 3. And, the protocol is 3 years long, or 2.5 to 3 years long. When in that time frame did you really have the realization that this is it and I'm back? This is me again.
So I don't know if there was a specific day, but around this time, and it was a weekend, I went out to dinner with my wife, and I remember ordering a drink. And so just to put it in perspective, during this whole time frame, I was, for the first 3 years of Lyme, I was sugar-free, caffeine-free, dairy-free, alcohol-free. I was, you get to a point where you strip down and you clean live because your body can't digest food. There's so many things that happen to you. You need to watch what you eat. And I felt well enough where I could order a drink. I mean, so another data point where I was not feeling well enough, or I was teetering on feeling good or feeling bad, where I could drink again. I know that sounds petty, but just enjoying a cocktail out to dinner. And then during this time too, I'd get done mowing the lawn and I'd have a beer. I couldn't do that for 3-4 years. And that's how I knew, my ability to enjoy a beer was how I knew that this is saving me. I mean,
and that's significant. So yeah. When you went out to dinner and you ordered that drink, were you able to just order off the menu too, instead of saying, I need you to take this off of this, and how do you cook this, and right. What do you do with that?
Yeah, we lived large that night. It was a dry martini that I ordered, and then I had a glass of wine after that. And my wife's like, "Wow, you're doing okay." But yeah, the way that your life is so confined, and you live in such a timid way when you're that ill. That you start to live again. I guess that's the answer. You realize that you're starting to live again, and that's how you know it's working.
That is so wonderful. So you finished the 3-year protocol.
So to be very clear, I just hit the 4-year mark. So wow. I did the full 3 years, and I've always been, it affects everybody differently, and I'll be very quick to say, I'm not sure if it's curative. I don't know if it's 100% a cure for Lyme disease. I will tell you that it saved my life. So I guess what I'm saying is I did the 3-year protocol and I continued to sting. So I don't sting now. I don't sting 10 stings 3 times a week. I'll sting once, maybe twice a week. Sometimes I'll go 2 or 3 weeks and I'll sting. I'm a little, what's the word? I don't want to say afraid, but I guess that is really the emotion. I'm a little afraid to stop, quite frankly.
Well, that makes sense. You don't want to go back, and that
right.
Makes sense.
And it hasn't come back, but I think that the benefits exceed the risks at this point. I know what it does to my body. And I think I've heard, I heard you talk about it one time. When I started, it made me really tired. Now when I sting, I get a little energized. It makes me feel good. You get a little jacked up.
It's kind of like having your own dose of one of those energy drinks without the drink.
Yeah, it's like getting a caffeine shot or something. And, I just know it's doing my body good. So I continue to do it. I could stop, but I've all along looked at it as something. And when I first started, I got to this place in my mind that I'm going to do this. And then about a year, 2 year in, I said, gosh, if I have to do this for the rest of my life, I can do it. I'll build it into my routine, like brushing your teeth in the morning. I'll sting a couple times a week. And that's kind of how I've evolved into it being a part of my life now.
Well, I want to share with you guys, Bill just gave us this amazing journey of 4 years of crazy antibiotics and things like that. And then another 3 years of bee venom therapy. And then the last year has been mostly maintenance. So Bill was kind enough, he met Ellie LaBelle and that started his journey. And about a year ago, I met Bill and he started my journey. So, you talk about if I could just touch one person, he has touched me and changed my life. So, Bill, thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing this with me.
You're welcome. And it warms my heart when you tell me that. I'm so happy. And just to give folks an insight, the reason I'm doing this is because what you said a month ago, I didn't know that I had impacted you. And I was invited to speak at the Mecklenburg Beekeepers Association meeting about 2 years ago, by a gentleman who was giving me bees. So he invited me to speak. And that's when I gave the speech and I taught, and you were in the audience that night. It helped you. And I conveyed his story, or your story, to him saying, you invited me to speak. If you hadn't invited me, I wouldn't have spoken. And this woman, Trish, wouldn't have heard me and it wouldn't have helped her. So it's truly, you never know who's listening. You want to be true to yourself. You want to be authentic with your story because you might be able to help somebody else. And I'm glad it's helped you, Trish. And I hope anyone considering this will do the research and think about it as being an option for them.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. Now, is there anything else you want to share with us about your journey? Any tips? I know you talked about your diet and that you kind of changed your diet drastically. Is there anything else that you feel like was really important during this process?
So detoxification is a really important part of it. For me, I did alternating, I forget what the term is. I would do cold showers, hot showers. I would drink a lot of lemon water. I would drink apple cider vinegar. I would take charcoal. So there's a lot of things you can do. Again, I won't get into the detail here, but detoxification is a huge part of it. That I think, sticking to it, getting to a place. The other thing too is for me, there was a lot of mental fortitude in doing this. And I got into a place in my mind where I said, this is medicine. This is going to cure me. And I'm a fairly smart bloke. As crazy as it sounds, it's not that crazy at all. If you look at the theory behind antibiotics, okay, you put an antibiotic in your blood system. The theory is if you keep it in your blood system long enough for it to eradicate the bug. Well, bee venom is the exact same thing. It's just a different delivery mechanism. It's not a pill, it's a sting. And the militin, that's the compound that's in the venom. If you have it in your blood long enough, it'll kill the spirochetes. It'll kill the infections that are there and not doing as much damage to your body. So it's really, if you start to get your mind in the right place about what it is you're doing and how insane it is to take all these antibiotics that, by the way, have their share of adverse effects to your body. I mean, I didn't even get into all the other problems I was having with my GI tract and yeast infections because antibiotics kill the good and the bad in you. With bee venom, the adverse effects were much less than the antibiotics. And the mechanism by which they work is kind of the same idea. So it's kind of a safer antibiotic. So it's one of those things where you asked me the question, what else would I recommend? It's getting your mind right. Don't look at it like, oh, this is crazy. I'm going to sting myself with a live bee. No, this is medicine. And it's fairly well documented. About a year and a half, 2 years into my bee venom, Ellie LaBelle and some folks that she had been working with at University of New Haven published a peer-reviewed article in the Journal of Antibiotics precisely discussing how Militin eradicated Lyme disease versus doxycycline, amoxicillin, all these other antibiotics. So it's getting well documented in the scientific community that this is a real thing. It's just a funny mode of delivery.
Right. I think the only side effect I have from venom therapy is itching.
Yeah,
Just
it goes away.
lots of itching. I'll let you know when my itching goes away.
Yeah, I think it was probably about the year mark where it fully went away. It's called the histamine reaction. Your body you don't itch anymore. And I think you might be past that. Maybe you're just going a little longer, but it does go away. It gets a lot better.
Well, actually, I'm only, I'm just entering my 6th month of 10 stings.
Oh, okay.
Because it took me a little while to actually commit. And I am a beekeeper.
Yeah.
I was a beekeeper before I decided to do bee venom therapy. So I did get stung randomly and noticed a difference when I did get stung. But I think I was just very fearful, kind of like you don't want to stop stinging.
Right.
I was afraid to be hopeful that something was going to be so significant that it would change the course of the path I was on. So I didn't start immediately, but I'm glad that I did.
Well, stick with it, as I know you will. And that's the other thing too. It's not for the faint of heart. But anybody arriving at a therapy like this, in my case anyway, you don't enter it lightly. You don't just say, oh, I'll try that. I had literally tried everything else. I'm very confident that I had. And I wouldn't have arrived to this as an option had I not done all that. A lot of times folks will ask me, what would you do different, or what would you say to someone considering it, or what would you have done different? And my answer will probably be the same as what I've heard from others that I know have done this. I would have started sooner. Honest to God, I would have started that first year had I known about it. Well, I say that, but part of me had to go through that process of listening to Western medicine and failing on it to actually open my mind to it. But gosh, I wish I had started it sooner. That
is a great recommendation, and I can honestly say that's the one thing I would say as well, is I wish I had started it sooner. Sure. So if you're only, and I want to clarify a little bit, if you're just on your first set of stings, you're just doing 1 or 2 stings. If you've got 1, you're just doing one side. If you've got 2, you're just going to put 1 on each side, and you want them to be across from each other. And then when you add your 3rd one in, it's over here, your 4th one here, and everyone kind of does it a little bit different. You can do 2 at a time, 1 at a time. It depends on your reaction, how your body's processing the exotoxin die-off, how bad your herx is, and so forth. And when I was doing my ramp up, I actually went from 4 to 6 and then back down to 4.
Yeah.
And back up to 6. And then I did the same thing at 8 because I really struggled at 8, and I went back down to 6. Is that what you did as well, Stephen?
Yeah. It's a, hindsight looking back, Ellie talks about it in the protocol, don't ramp up too quickly, take your time, everybody's body acclimates. And I had times where I just wanted to get going, and I went from, 4 to 6.
Right.
Or, I wanted to get to 10 quicker. You got to be real methodical, and you got to go 1 sting at a time. Because there's a couple of times where I had, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I went too quick, and you get a worse herx.
So Stephen, that we interviewed last week, he is asking, do you still have bad days?
So bad days? No. Do I have days where I'm not? So, and I was talking with, I think, Jason a couple of weeks ago, I'm not 100%. I just want to be very clear to anyone listening. I'm not 100%. I'm not the person I was. Lyme disease has done some damage to me, but I am 95% most days. There'll be days where, I might be dragging a little bit, where I get hints of some mild symptomology, but it's hard to say that that's Lyme disease. I mean, I get regular blood work, and I keep following up on things like that. I think it does damage to your body. And Trish, I may have been talking to you about it. I read some theories that your immune system has been flaring for in my case, on and off for 7 years.
Yes, we were talking about that. Yeah, we were talking about that, and it's like your body's automatic response.
Right.
And when something happens is to do that same symptom, even if there's nothing there, It's
Right.
your body's automatic response.
Yeah, some call it like, immune muscle memory. I mean, I don't have bad days anymore, but there's days where I'm not, I might be 80%. But
Okay.
again, most days I'm 90, 95%. And, that's the new normal for me, and that's fine.
So did you have any urological symptoms with yours? And if so, have they been resolved?
So neurological?
Urological.
Oh, urological. Yeah, I did. I had, well, I just turned 50 last year. But when I was about 47 and I got bit when I was 44, I started having problems with urination. And I had kind of an early onset of BPH, benign prostate hyperplasia. And I had a really good urologist who thought that maybe all of the inflammation and stress from the Lyme disease was kind of triggering this response. And those symptoms haven't gone away, but they've been markedly improved with bee venom.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we've got a couple of questions. Benadryl has been brought up, and no, we cannot take Benadryl. The only time you want to take Benadryl is if you are having an anaphylactic reaction. If you take Benadryl, it negates the bee venom, and it won't work because you're stopping the histamine process. Another question is, how do you know if your herx is an emergency? Well, anaphylactic shock is absolutely an emergency, and you have to judge if you're in an emergency situation. I think, whether it's breathing or neurological, you're going to retrace, and I'm sure that you retraced as well. So can you talk to us about your retracing, and if during that time you felt like your retracing was severe enough and it was an emergency situation?
I don't think I've ever felt, so early on in Lyme disease, there was a couple times where I wanted to go to an emergency room. And I think those were the early herxes from antibiotics. But with BVT, I can't ever say I felt like I was in an emergency situation. But to that end, you have to read the protocol. You do have to have Benadryl. You have to have an EpiPen. But I never felt like I needed to use either one of those. As far as retracing, that's an interesting theory. There's some truth to it. So there's symptomology that I had very early on in the disease that would come back in an acute way while I was doing the bee venom. And so I really don't know the science behind that. If that's muscle memory with your body healing, but I can't really speak to that. I know some symptoms that I hadn't felt in years would come back. Some of the neuropathy and the tingling, pains and aches that I had early on came back during the BVT process, but have since gone away. So there's something to the retracing. I don't entirely know what it is, but there's something to it.
And did you have any new symptoms start during this time, or was it just completely retracing and things that you had been accustomed to with the Lyme disease before starting bee venom therapy?
Yeah, I can't think of any new symptoms, but again, I had hundreds of symptoms, as most people do. So nothing, the unfortunate thing with Lyme disease, you kind of present like a hypochondriac. It's like, gosh, I'm ringing in my ears, my chest hurts. I got a pain in my elbow. I mean, you just seem like you're making things up. But no, I don't think anything new happened other than the localized itching and swelling of the bee sting, which, is a minor symptom of the actual protocol. But other than that, nothing new. It was all symptoms that I had experienced, the first 4 years of the Lyme.
So moving forward, I imagine you see a whole future of things you can do and things you thought you weren't going to be able to do, and kind of like a whole new world.
Well, so as I said, I just turned 50, and a year ago I planned my trip, and up to a week ago I was going to Ireland. I was taking the family to Ireland, but with everything that's going on in the world, that's been canceled. But yes, those opportunities to live life again are real. I've definitely have my life back, and have for the last at least 2.5 years.
And that's something to celebrate in addition to turning 50.
Thanks.
And Ireland sounds amazing. I'm sure that you guys will get there and you will be able to have a vacation that you'll remember And you'll look at those pictures and you'll know that you were Lyme free, like that you took those pictures, you felt good, you weren't pretending, you weren't smiling because you needed to smile. You actually will feel amazing while you're there.
Indeed.
So this has been such an amazing sharing moment, and to know that a very short time of 3 years, and in the Lyme world, 3 years is really not a long time, because many people that have Lyme and that have been suffering have suffered for 20, 25 years. And that's a long time. And you're right, everyone thinks you're kind of a hypochondriac. You're like, how can you have all these things? Right. Well, they're not all these things, they're one thing. And bee venom therapy addresses those and helps you to get through them and gives you back your life. But I want to thank you, Bill, for sharing this with us. I know that going down this journey can be a little bit of a struggle sometimes. I hope that all of you that have joined us will ask as many questions, will prepare yourselves mentally to go down this road. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining. If you are enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe our channel, which is Pollen Peddlers, so we can continue to share these stories with you, and the journey of those that have not only completed the protocol, but are just starting the journey. I feel like this is helpful for everyone that may be considering it or is currently in it. The Lyme community is full of support and love, and Lyme can be a very lonely disease. So like and subscribe our channel, and we will have another one in 2 weeks. And thank you everyone for joining us, and go out and have some beautiful sunshine today. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Trish.
Thank you.